Ladies and gentlemen, we begin the panel discussion for the day. The panel discussion is on big studios make big soundtracks. The panelists on this session, well, they really don't need any introduction, but let us just get a glimpse through what we have. The session is being moderated by recording and mix engineer, Mr. Farhad Dadipurjur. Farhad currently also holds the position of National Business Head, Studio Solutions for Alphatech Audio Video, while he continues to engineer freelance and out of his personal studio, the Sonic Laundry. Can I please have Mr. Farhad on stage? Please come on stage, sir. Up next, we have Mr. Bishwadeep Chatterjee, film sound designer, sound editor, audio mixer and partner at Q Factor and Orbis Studios and 4-time National Award winner. Having a career span of just over 3 decades, he has virtually worked in every department of sound for feature films, short films, documentaries, television serials, advertisement films, and music albums. I'm running out of things to say. Our next panelist is Mr. Shantanu Hudlikar. Can you please join, sir? Mr. Shantanu is a senior consulting recording and mix engineer. His genius for recording and mixing music from folk to Western and Indian classical and everything in between has made him an inspiration for established engineer and upcoming engineers from India as well as around the world. Shantanu has bagged many technical and popular awards as well. And last but not the least, we have Mr. KJ Singh. Please join us, sir. Mr. KJ Singh is an audio engineer, music producer, and partner at Asli Music. Over the last 35 years, he has worked with top singers, composers, new artists, and bands. Mr. Singh has won several awards, which include the National Film Award for Best Audiography, Filmfare Award for Best Sound Design, and the Pro Sound System AES India Award 2006. Can we please have the panel start, gentlemen? Thank you.
Check. Request if those lights need just be dimmed a little bit, Collective age is around 200 plus over here. So could the lights be dimmed a little bit? It just hits the eye too much. There's a collective age of around 200 plus over here. So, we have some issues.
200 just this side,
Okay. Hi, everyone. A big thank you firstly to my co-conspirators who kindly agreed to join us for what I hope will be a very interesting chat about both the past and the future of studios. Since all our lengthy resumes have been already kindly read out, I don't need to introduce anyone. So let's begin today's session with big studios make big soundtracks. Now, to be fair, I was originally suggesting the age-old digital versus analog fight out here. I'm going to be playing the devil's advocate out here for this and put in my 2 bits. Everyone here on stage, I think it's safe to say, has either built, managed, or overseen the running of a large studio for a significant length of time between all of us. And all of us have also, I think, seen quantum changes in our life where all of us have also downsized and are working from our own personal spaces besides the studios at various degrees and places. So I think the collective wisdom held here is, I'm in pretty good company. Since he was talking about the median age of all of us for the bright lights, I think the median age for all of us in terms of studio experience collectively would be 120 years, which is a far more important figure. So we need to start with this discussion of big studios make big soundtracks. I can think of no better person to start this off than Shantanu. I mean, when you say big studio, you think of Shantanu and YRF. So over to him.
Well, first, it's really important to clarify as to what you mean by big studio. Because to me, big studio is not just about size, which is what a lot of people tend to confuse the issue with. Big studio, it's very important to define what you mean by big studio. In my opinion, the definition of a big studio is a large format studio where, the classical concept of walking into studio, well, sorry, before going any further, let me warn you that there's a lot of explicit language which is going to be used by me, all right? So, because I can't help it. So please don't get too upset by that. You
We
can
love
get
him
upset,
because of
but
that.
not so upset.
He's always been outspoken. Sorry,
Yeah,
please
that's the
continue.
part of the large format thing. What do you talking
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's right. So yeah, there's nothing like walking into a studio, walk into the control room, and you walk in, and your first reaction is, "Fuck." Well, that's a big studio. Honestly speaking, it's like it's got a nice console, minimum of around 32 channels. It's got nice large speakers. It's got a tape machine. Well, that's where it started off, right? It's all started off over there. We'll talk about a bit later on as to how things have progressed. So that was the way studios were, because there were bands that recorded together. And if you had to go and look at it, a minimum amount of microphone inputs for a drum kit would be, say, even if it's a basic drum kit used by, say, the Beatles, like Ringo Starr, kick drum, snare drum, 2 toms, overheads, okay? So that's straight away, you got minimum 8, include a room inside. So you need 8 faders, okay? So that's just 8 faders for the drummer. Then comes bass guitar players, and vocals, and everyone is tracking together. So you need a large amount of inputs. So that's my concept as to where the whole term of big studio came in, because at that time, there were only big studios. So you didn't say you're going into a big studio, you just said you're going to a studio. So make that clear as to how you're going to distinguish as to what really is a big studio. And yes, the way things are recorded today, things have changed. And it's not that it's changed for the worse or anything of that sort. Things have just changed. So therefore, things have gotten smaller, more concise, and much easier to handle. And those days, there was just an engineer, there was a tape op, and there was an assistant engineer. Today, there's one guy who can do everything, because it's all there at, within ergonomically, it's within his thing. So things have changed, and we can carry on with this further. Just wanted to bring into a context as to what we are talking when it comes to big studios. It's not just size, but format as well.
Thanks, Shantanu. Next, KJ, would you like to weigh in on the differences? I mean, you worked in plenty of big studios and you continue to maintain a home studio as well. Before he speaks, I'd like to just, as Shantanu, define the big studio. The reality is most of today's tracks are made in personal or home studios, most of which are probably much better equipped in terms of monitoring, equipment, gear, console than a lot of the big studios today. So democracy rules. So it's cheaper gear has, well, cheaper I say in a relative sense, because cheaper gear has made it a lot more possible to work. I mean, at the base level, you can just work with software and a laptop.
It becomes so much easier, because like right now, you could bring down 20 faders down to maybe just one single fader, which is probably giving you the best output through summing and things like that. So the ways, the workarounds to what has happened right now, but right now we're here to talk about big studios. So let's just
So
stick
in
to topic.
context of that, there's been a long time slur on the home studio. I mean, traditionally the home studio is, the guy's got a Porter studio, 4-track tape, 8-track tape if you're lucky, and a couple of mics, a few pieces of foam stuck on the ceiling and the wall in front of him and a pair of speakers, and that's your home studio. That's no longer the case. I think we can speak from our collective experience that a lot of us have either seen or owned home studios that will rival any big studio in terms of gear, equipment, quality, and most importantly, output. Over to KJ.
Yeah, I was just remembering something which triggered off from what Farhad just said, home studio. So after my course in Canada, when I came back, I actually started a home studio in my bedroom, exactly with a Pota studio, 4-track cassette, and a drum machine and a keyboard, till I got married and my wife threw us out. So that was the end of the home studio. Short-lived, but yeah, I experienced it. Even now, I have a small studio, which I would still call a home studio in that sense, in the essence of the so-called home studio. But to take off from what Shantanu mentioned, when you walk in and that's the feel you got, I think for me, big studio has always been about the physics of it, first and foremost. When we talk of audio, what do we think of? We think of music, we think of dialogue. For me, it's about moving air. And if you have to move air, God damn it, you need to have that space to move that air. And if you don't have that space to move that air, what are you going to hear? It's not going to be what actually the instrument sounds like. I don't know how many of you have had the experience of standing next to a brass section ever in your life. Try it. Believe me, you'll never want to go back again. Okay? You'll be deaf very soon. That SPL meter, it's clipping it. The air pressure in that room is so huge that is going to blow your eardrums apart. So you need that air to record instruments like that. And we have to go back in time and history to what the music was being made at that time. What were the instruments being used at that time? And that necessitated having big, large format studios. You recorded bands. All of us who are at this age group, as we are talking about, we grew up with the music of the 50s and the 60s. And we're talking about bands. We're talking about guitars, wall of sound. We're talking of all that. That was not possible in a small studio or a home studio. So you needed those studios to go and record that stuff. So the music dictated it. Then the second thing was engineers, the producers and the engineers. You needed that experience of those experienced people. And because you were a newbie, I'm a new artist. I don't know anything about what this is all about, and I want the best. So where do? You go to a big studio. That's where you'll get all the work done. So you're using not just the studio and the gear, which is very important, and those engineers and producers have knowledge of that gear because they work in and out every day on those machines. So they know what they sound like and what they do. When you twist a knob, I don't know how many of you actually know how much can I push it. We play it safe normally, I find, most engineers.
No way, I never played safe.
Not, Shantanu, you are excluded.
I never played safe.
You are excluded.
Yeah.
So those engineers have an idea because they've been playing with that for a very, very long time. So you're going to a big studio for that. So that's why a big studio is required for the kind of music you're doing. And that music making has changed. Music instruments have changed, which have necessitated now, or not necessitated, but like Farhad said very rightly, I mean, the need of the time right now is that small studios, you can do equal amount of fabulous work. So the music which is coming out does not warrant recording those instruments or that kind of music maybe. So yes, if a DJ wants to produce a track with a loop, why do he want to go to a big studio to just at least get an idea down or something? Maybe to record his vocals, or if he wants to do some other sections, yes. But essentially, if you're making electro or pop music, you would still be able to pull off a fabulous job with stuff that you have at your disposal at your house. And I think so we have to be a little in context to history as to how things are moving and be a little observant of that.
That history is really important because today, whatever you do, however great your sample libraries might be, you can't replicate the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra sitting in my bedroom. They got to be in a studio which has the kind of volume. When I say volume, I don't mean physical volume as in loudness. I mean volume of space for those instruments. There are 200 musicians. That those instruments need room to breathe. Exactly what KJ is saying. You need to push air. I'm going it another way. Just look at a simple, example. Like, for a human being to live and breathe, he needs air. And every instrument is actually a living being. It might not be in its human form, but it's a living being. And that instrument can only be able to express itself according to the air that is surrounding it. Which is why most people I see, and this is probably going off topic, Farad, sorry, is when I see people placing microphones so close to the instrument, where they're not even letting the harmonic take place, and before that you're trying to capture it. So all that you're actually capturing is saturation, and saturation not in such a good way. You know, you're overloading the microphone at the microphone level. So which is why you need to, the larger you want things to sound, the further away the microphone could be. The closer you get, things are going to get small. Simple rule of thumb, study the physics later.
Okay. Mr. Chatterjee, who needs no introduction to anyone out here.
Thanks for it. So, we come from a very interesting generation. From complete analog, we saw the entering of the digital. We have worked extensively on analog, and we are, I think, some of the lucky few who have actually heard or worked on good analog sound. Let's not go into the debate, but the shift from a large studio to a small studio has largely been, the reason has mainly been economic. And that is the main reason that we kind of came down to a much smaller, smaller units. When I came into the industry, there were huge studios, massive studios. The hall would be the size of this conference room. And then the small studios started taking shape. Then we had a mushrooming of very small studios, but not home studios, mind you. There were smaller studios to do smaller work. And then again, there was a wave of coming up with slightly bigger studios where Yash Raj and then Spectral Harmony and all these other places came, where you realize that you do need, in spite of, because what we were trying to do was we were trying to compensate that space with multi-tracks. Now that multi-tracks were there, we were saying, okay, we can work this in a smaller studio. But it still was a proper studio. It was maybe not as big as this, but it really was a professional recording studio, even if it had not very expensive equipment. But what eventually happened with the sophistication of technology, a lot of people started setting up home systems. And my respect to music producers who, there's a very fine line between music production and mixing. Like KJ is one of the few guys who are, doing both. And we have all without getting any acknowledgement, we have also been involved in a lot of music production. And
Mixing is production.
Mixing is the ultimate thing of production. But
In this country.
there were discussions, there were reasons why, okay, let's try a different octave on this particular thing so that it does not clash, etc., etc. Starting from there to a little more complex situation. Anyway, so what I'm trying to get at is the shift was large. People have smaller units. These guys are very right when they're saying volume in terms of space and volume in terms of, not just in terms of levels, but in terms of space is very necessary. Because just last week, Shantanu, I still like to think of YRF as Shantanu's studio, by the way. And because it smells of Shantanu inside that room. You walk into that room.
Shantanu, take over.
Yeah. So I needed 100 people to shout and to get slogans, and there was no other studio, no other big studio that I could find but Yash Raj. And it is not something which I can get 10 or 20 people to multi-track them and make them sound big. I needed 100 people. So I couldn't get 100 because of restrictions of, recent restrictions of COVID and stuff, but I did manage to get in about 80, 90 people. And when they were shouting in that room, when they were doing their chants or when they were doing what they had to do for that particular film, it sounded like, yes, this is what mass sounds like. That we will never get in a small studio. And this also goes in for music. Because you're right, when he's saying that the brass section is there, I would go with my ears closed to hear and mic them while they were practicing. There was a whole brass section. And while we were recording scores for backgrounds, there were live musicians. Do you realize that because that there are no new faces in the violin section in the industry. Because it takes years to come, years to practice to become a professional musician. And then when you walk in with a violin, you get paid peanuts, less than peanuts. So unfortunately, we don't have new faces in the violin industry. Today, what is happening is most professional musicians are going abroad. We had some very fine musicians. Maybe their sons are doing very well in music, by the way. Their sons, most of them are doing very well in electronic music. Most of them are doing very well in other types of music and engineering. But I'm not seeing live violinists. I'm not seeing a live brass section. And unfortunately, today Bombay had a very heavy Indian percussion system, very precise, tight, and heavy percussion.
Still is.
Musicians, they are diminishing. Now what is happening is that this is because the economics of it. People cannot say that they cannot afford. Yes, with technology, what has happened is the rhythm guitarists, there used to be 6 guitarists who would come and play their whatever rhythm guitar, whatever CFG chords that they're playing over there. But what happened is they realized that we don't need these guys anymore. And then they were being replaced by VSTs with actual sounds of proper guitars and how they were programmed. And that's very sad because all these guys started fading out from the industry.
I'm going to just add to what you're saying. So what has also started happening is a lot of the music directors didn't know the difference. They didn't know the sound of a group of, say, dholak players. They had no idea what it sounds like. So they just felt, okay, take 2 dholak players and multi-track them 20 times.
Yeah.
And then realize, but it still doesn't sound like what it used to sound like in Mehboob studios.
Big.
It wasn't sounding big, and then the string section started getting replaced by stuff like Vienna and all much later, but it started off with synthesized sounds and stuff like that. I remember early on in my career when I think it was one of these Roland earlier than M1 models when it came out, there was this guy who very happily got it into the thing. He says, look, मैं flute बजाता हूँ, इसमें flute का tone भी बहुत अच्छा आता है. I was very happy to hear it was a nice English Western flute sound. But when he played the phrase, I just looked at him. I said, that's fantastic. But after this piece, the flute guy would be brain dead. Because when you have programmed it, you have not kept any space for him to take a breath. So if you're playing a flute, if you're choosing an instrument, play it like a flautist. So these are things which gave synthesized music a bad name also. This is slightly digressing from the main thing, but what I'm trying to get at is these are things that, suddenly the person who's not so musically trained, which usually is the person who's spending the money.
Yeah, it's the case nowadays.
Yeah, because I'm not saying producer, because producer has various names. So they are saying
Music directors too.
Isse kaam chala lo, and directors, unfortunately. So what has happened is they are making do with this. The budgets are coming down, and eventually they started capsuling the entire music budget and giving it to the composer. Ki everything is yours. Ye le, isme karke de. So friend goes to even in his bathroom studio, does whatever he does, and he comes back and gives it ki ye le, isme itna aayega.
Unfortunately, इसमें live orchestra नहीं है, लेकिन Vienna का orchestra है.
But that came in later. So unfortunately, what started happening was we started compromising in terms of things and in terms of equipment, in terms of the cost, and we started losing out on this beautiful live instrument, live musicians. Today, if you will still find a John Williams having a live orchestra standing over there. You will still find most of these big composers outside still using live instruments.
I wonder what they know that we don't.
Yes. And now the thing is that we want to revive that. There was also a discussion in between with one of the directors who wanted to do a period film and who wanted to record live. But unfortunately, first of all, the musicians were not available. And second of all, the cost has become triple, which should have been the cost anyways much earlier. So the bad side is a lot of musicians who were not probably as skillful as their better counterparts, they kind of faded out of the scene. But what good has happened is it has given a lot of respect and value to a soloist who's very good in in his particular instrument, in their respective instruments, in their respective, you know. So what has happened is it has added value over there. But unfortunately, by and large, it's a sad story for the recording industry because most of the good musicians, they have to keep their fires glowing. So they are traveling with, in shows and stuff like that. And suddenly there was a nosedive. I think early 2000, late 90s, there was a nosedive. But having said that, it was not just in India. I remember studios like Townhouse, which I had visited in London, or Hit Factory in New York. They have shut shop. And the problem is the same. They are not recording bands. They cannot afford to keep such big spaces for music anymore. I heard Townhouse sold this thing to property developers. And we were like devastated because those were things that we grew up with, listening to their sounds, listening to the musicians. So unfortunately, that is happening now. The problem is there is a lot of money, but the allocation is very unfair.
Okay. So let's take a look at why this is happening. There are many, many reasons. I mean, all of us have touched on a few. The first thing today is property prices. When the property, even a historic studio is worth more than the studio's debt and the studio's earning capability. If you're servicing a debt for a console for 14 or 15 years that you bought, and a lot of studios that went under were still paying for the $1 million consoles that they bought confidently in the hype of the 80s. And when your profit per year is probably 1/50th or 100th of what your property is worth immediately on sale, that's immediately the end of business. Because you have to remember, at the end of the day, studios are owned by business people. It is a business. Yeah, so if you were making 1 rupee a month and somebody said, just sell off this place that you're sitting in and we will give you 2,000 rupees, it's a no-brainer, right? I mean, at a simplistic level. Why would you struggle, pay electricity bills, engineers, keep the upkeep, maintenance, air conditioning costs, etc., to make 1 rupee a month when somebody's just giving you 2,000 bucks to get the hell out of there? So that's the first cause of big studios. And this recession is all over the world. Just like Vishwa said, that all of us collectively mourn the death of big studios, especially the big ones. I mean, the number of them that have gone under is frightening. And about 3 years back, Abbey Road was conferred a historic status to protect it from being torn down. Because even today, Abbey Road is worth more, the property is worth more than the studio will ever make.
The Buckingham Palace probably, more than that.
Yeah. So that's the first reason why big studios are closing down. That gear has become significantly cheaper. I want you all to just think today, everything that you can do in your laptop with whatever DAW you're using, yeah, used to cost close to $1.5 million, not even 25 years back. Everything you can do on your laptop today, I'll repeat it, everything you can do on your laptop today in terms of production, recording, mixing with plugins would have cost you $1.5 to $2.5 million to buy physical stuff to do the same thing less than 25 years ago. That is how much the process has got democratized. Okay, so you have some successful producers, musicians who are lucky today to have prime choice of gear, equipment. But what else gets lost when a big studio closes down? Well, the most important thing I think that nobody touched on is transfer of knowledge. And you see, you don't, when you're working in a home studio, and this is something I realized when Famous shifted from our iconic building in Mahalakshmi to Santa Cruz. If you walked out for a cigarette break or a coffee break into the Famous reception, yeah, you'd meet 40 other guys were there. Somebody was doing his edits, somebody was doing his offline, somebody was doing his online. One of the 6 studios, some 6 different musicians were there. We were hanging out, talking in the coffee shop. There was exchange of ideas, thoughts. Hey, come in and see my edit. Hey, come in and see this color correction. Come and see. You know, all of us now are working in a little bubble. There is no
Or where do we get
exposure.
together this evening and get hammered?
All of us are working in a bubble. There is no creative interactivity in thoughts, ideas, work, anything with each other anymore. And that's a dangerous thing. So, as I was saying, old big studios were the primary source of passing down of knowledge from engineer to assistants to interns who further went and propagated that.
It's exactly similar to when all went to college. We learned more in the college canteen than we did in the classroom. So this is exactly what used to happen over here.
So, as a result, what happens? Your collective memory in the consciousness of recording is fading. Today, even in a room full of stalwarts, I don't know how many people have recorded a live string section, or a live brass section, or a live pakhawaj section, or a live drum kit, for that matter. So, what happens? I've said this for a long time. Great mastering is never going to save a bad mix. Yeah, so everything starts at the recording stage. And what is happening? There are no recordings happening. Yeah, there's a whole generation, no insult to all of you, but there's a whole generation of kids who thinks that everything comes on a USB stick, or now, of course, on Google Drive or WeTransfer. They have no clue how it was recorded, how it was mic'd, where it needs to sit in the mix, or anything. Just simply because it's just a word to them. Tuba is a word. Trombone is a word. They have never seen what the instrument looks like. Forget recording one. So how do you get into that? So that's the first thing that goes away when a big studio dies. The passing on of knowledge. And it's not just within that studio, because it's not a guarantee that everyone who's worked in the studio as an assistant or an intern is going to continue working in that studio. Yeah? So those guys go out somewhere else and they're working as engineers, and that knowledge again gets filtered down to their assistants. And those guys go out and join other studios. In the old days, we didn't have any this institute and that institute and come and learn recording in 6 months and, oh sir, we've reached analog, or oh sir, we've reached drum machines just now. We didn't, the only school was the big studio.
Just taking off from your mastering thing, Hum Dil De Chuke Sanam was one of the first film song albums that I had taken to London for mastering. So that was like, it was fantastic. So it was very difficult, first of all, to convince, but Sanjay Bansali, being technically aware and, he wanted to also do his best. So I kind of explained to him, giving the analogy of what mastering is in terms of color correction in video, for example, to bring in a certain consistency to the visuals by, tampering or tweaking the colors so that all the colors, more or less, all the reds look alike and stuff like that. So, but it paid off, and eventually they agreed, and we went to London to master. We came back, and it was a fantastic master. There was a good sheen, and people suddenly woke up to this whole thing. So now there is also this herd mentality. London mein master karte hain. So an extension of what Farhad, this was an extension of what Farhad was saying, is like, so they started doing it at wherever, whatever stage of mix, whatever level of mix and whoever, they were all running to the cheapest 50-pound studio who would do something in that sadi and give it to them saying, and they would come back saying, ki London mein master kiya. So then it became a thing. Everybody started rushing to London to do the mastering because this film did well. And I know even a producer who went to shoot in Hungary, employed us as technicians, employed Ismail as the composer because ये सब करने से picture hit होता है. So he has not realized that there is something called a script or a story also. Anyway, so these guys would rush to London to do the mastering. So one guy came to me and he said, "Ki boss, I'm going to master. Do you think?" So one producer came and says, "Do you think this will really?" So I had to tell him that if it's a bad mix, it will sound like a very good bad mix. It will not improve your mix. It is going to sound like a good bad master. So I don't know if it made sense, but that was the truth. So having said that, a lot of people, even today, what they're doing is whatever mix, whatever level they're listening, they're sending it across to online, and they're getting it mastered. I'm not saying it's fantastic. There are a lot of people who are doing good work out there. A lot of, like one of our friends also who's, mastering from out there. But it makes a difference when the engineer or the music producer goes and sits with the mastering engineer, does an A-B comparison with what it was to what it is. It makes a huge difference because when he's sending the master, you're saying that everything else is right, but suddenly because of this, the reverb has increased or this particular thing has increased. There was a scene where I was doing a Punjabi album where the dhol was like, squashed and made into that full London underground kind of a thing. So I had to tell him that, no, you can't do that. Dhol is to Bhangra what guitar is to rock. So you have to bring it out, you have to bring, the whole thing back. So he needed that sort of a guidance because he comes from a different cultural background. But in UK, of course, today, they're more Indian than we are. So that is one. And number two, another thing I wanted to say is, we are living in technologically fantastic times. I think what is required is space along with that technology and live hands, live musicians, so that we can have the best of both worlds. So we are doing it in bits and pieces. We are doing it over there. But we need to start this. We need to come back to this in India. I don't know who is listening, where they're listening, but some idealistic people should get together and bring it out. Yes, there is no money in studios. The returns are pathetic. We should be charging not less than 20,000 rupees an hour to, to make it a sustainable business. And we are not even charging 1/4 of that in bigger studios. So
1/8.
it does not add up. So that's a thing, unfortunately, that we are living with.
Life is shit, man. But it actually isn't, because there are people like the four of us on this podium who still believe that there is hope, and which is exactly what we are hoping to try and get together, just to make people aware. Because the sad part of everything is shit breeds shit, right? So unfortunately, when you have young kids who are clueless, who are then, it's the cliche term, blind leading the blind, and that's exactly what has happened right now. No one seems to know what is right. Okay, actually, there's nothing that's right. Like Srijesh said right at the earlier on in the first one of the morning, said, if it sounds good, it's right? But there has to be some parameters, man. You study a mix done by Al Schmidt, you study a mix done by Bruce Swedien, you study a mix done by Ed Cherney, all these kind of guys, they're all brilliant. And there's something so good. And I keep coming back to the fact that there has to be that, oh, fuck, this is what I want to do. What I see lacking today is, forget about big studios and small studios, is the passion to do better than the best. Everything over here in India, unfortunately, mediocrity is king. And and the majority is that way, unfortunately. People don't want to push you into doing better. People are saying, itna paisa mein itna hi milega. How can that be? I dare say that, as Indians, and I'm very much an Indian, we are the worst people for growth because we don't like to see other people grow, Everyone wants to do things individually. No one likes to see other people come up. Try to feel better by putting other people down. But that doesn't actually make you feel better. See, this has got nothing to do with sound or big studios. It's all got to do with attitudes, okay? And it also boils down, smoke some dope, get high, it opens up your mind to lots of different things, and it's really important. It's better than doing alcohol, because alcohol can do strange things to you. So smoke some hash and things like that. I guarantee you'll be a better person.
And KJ, what do you have to say to that?
I'm just trying to still absorb what Shantanu says sometimes.
You don't need any high. You are high, perpetually.
Yeah, I'm perpetually high. That's true.
See, he's got his beard is the color of weed, man.
Only Shantanu would notice that. I was just going to say it in the first part itself, what Farhad just pointed out. And this has been something that I have been talking about a lot. I'm not from the film world, okay? I'm not an FTI graduate. I did not grow up on film music per se. I'm a hardcore rock and roller who grew up in Delhi, and I was kidnapped and by Vishal and brought to Bombay to work with him. So my early introduction to film's music was through these big studios, whether it was Sahara or Mehboob sometimes we'd go to, and a Sunny studio at some point, call it large format studio, yes. But the thing which I noticed, which stuck with me, was there was storytelling going on there. Exactly what Farhad was saying.
Beautiful.
That's storytelling. Now think about it, a scenario. We've booked a morning 9 o'clock session for chorus. And chorus in that time used to be 20 Western chorus and 20 Indian chorus. They were two different ones, okay? They were never the same. So the 20 are going to come and dub while 20 are sitting outside. And then there is percussion in the afternoon after the lunch break. But they've come early. So what is happening outside? They're all talking to each other. Stories are being shared of how so-and-so did a recording. Mehboob में उस time लक्ष्मीकांत जी ने क्या किया, फलाने ने उस time पे ऐसा किया, उसने गिटार ऐसे बजाया, और किशोर दा बाहर निकल गए गाते हुए. मतलब ये सब stories चल रही हैं. आप उस पे पनप रहे हैं. आप उसमें जी रहे हैं. And unfortunately with the studios, the large format studios going, those stories have gone. You kids will have no idea what the fuck the stories were, man. Sorry, Shantanu, I used your term.
Yes! Yes!
He has a copyright on that. So you guys have no idea. So you've missed out on that. And that's such a huge part of our culture.
That was a canteen that he was talking about.
So that is something I feel very strongly about, that when I talk to people who are from that era, whether they are lyricists, whether they are writers, whether they are composers, musicians, whoever, जब भी मैं उन्हें मिलता हूँ, मैं कोशिश करता हूँ कि मैं उनमें से जितना हो सके स्टोरी निचोड़ लूँ, उनसे ले लूँ ये, क्योंकि ये एक भंडार है.
Because there's so much to learn just from those stories,
मतलब सिर्फ बताने का कि एक माइक से उन्होंने ना रिकॉर्डिस्ट ने ऐसे ऐसे किया. My God, I have learned so much as an engineer. I'll be honest and share it with you today from Lata Mangeshkar ji. She's not an engineer, she's a singer. But I have learned as an engineer how she approaches the mic. So that you will never get to see or hear unless you are recording in studios where all this action is happening. String section ko kaise record hai? Alan Mayerson came to Yash Raj and we had a fabulous session thanks to AR who called him over and the orchestra was there. And he was talking about his miking techniques. He was talking about how he was doing things. Where would you get this experience, my friend? You pay thousands of dollars and you'll have to fly all over there to do it. But yahan mein mil raha hai. Why? Because we had a large format studio which could afford an orchestra and an engineer and so many others who could do it. So this passing on of information, passing on of knowledge is such an integral part of learning which cannot be given in any school wherever whatsoever.
It's the big studio vibe,
Right?
According to me, everything is about a vibe, and if you haven't experienced a big studio, take the time out to go and see what happens, and then you will know the difference. It's not just the gear. You could have all the gear. You could have 500 series, 48 of them sitting in your small studio. It's not the gear. It's not the gear. It's all got to do with the vibe of the space, the size of the monitors, the sound of the room. It's just fuck. I don't know how else to explain it. It's just like, it makes your hair stand. You walk into a room. I remember doing this recording. I think that was a film that Srijesh mixed, Agnipath, and we had to record 40
Doles.
dhols. Yeah, and can you imagine? That's 80 hands. 40 dhol players, 80 hands hitting that 3-foot rimmed radius skin with a mallet cymbal, with a mallet stick. Can you imagine the sound pressure? That kind of bottom end, fucking hell, you're not going to get anywhere. Okay? And how was that 40 dhols recorded? It was recorded with 4 microphones. Because what am I recording? I'm not recording right next to the instrument. Yeah? I'm recording the room, and the room is getting saturated. So I need to capture the saturation that is taking place because the air that is being moved is like boom. It's like, it punches you in the face. Now that has to be captured in its entirety, in its full spectrum, onto your tape machines. Okay, sorry, not tape machines, onto your DAW, whatever DAW you're using. And you can do it. And you could do that only if you had a big room. So, we've been diverting a lot, but big studios, big soundtracks, sure thing.
How many people have actually been in Yashraj and watched Shantanu working? Out of here? 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
You guys are damn lucky, yeah.
Okay. So to know what it means to work in a big studio, you need to actually watch Shantanu having a ball while he's recording the music he's enjoying or mixing.
Yeah, we're having fun. We're part of the band. You're dancing, you're doing everything, and then the music comes together, and you just say like, shit, this is the reason why I always wanted to be an engineer, and this is exactly what I'm doing today.
You also need that space to dance, na?
That's true. That's true.
If you
Okay.
look at Shantanu's mixer, it's got a lot of dents because of his head banging.
Okay, so anyway, get a little serious and back on topic about this.
Just before, sorry, Farhad, just
Go on.
before you get in, an extension of what KJ was saying about Lataji, I had a beautiful experience. When I first got to work with Asha Bhosle, I was relatively very new in the industry. She got to know me. She sat me down on the chair next to her, and she explained. She just told me that how Mohammad Rafi had taught her to sing on the in the microphone, how to befriend the microphone. So when Shantanu was talking about how we managed with that one particular microphone, there was just one microphone with the singer and everybody else orchestrated around. So she took me to that era where they had to fade out by moving out. They had to come close to the mic and how to sing off axis a little, how to bring it in, how to bring in your presence. All that they were doing physically what we are doing today with technology. So this is something, so some things have not changed. It's just that how we achieve that. So this sort of a discipline, I like to call that discipline, is something which I was like listening, in complete awe of the fact that, because by our generation, multi-tracks had started coming. They had started happening. So we did have the flexibility of various tracks. We did have the flexibility of, working with independent, though limited number of tracks, but still they were not like, they were multi-tracks. And still we could work on EQ and processing and reverb and stuff like that. But in their time, that was not a possibility. So they had to pretty much do everything. So this is how, for about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, we spoke. And it freaked me out because I was like getting to hear it, straight from, it's like somebody from the museum directly coming and talking to me. So it was a huge privilege. And so when we are talking about interacting with older musicians, I remember the technical godfather in the industry was Kersey Lord. And he was an amazing guy. The latest electronic gadget would be on his table. And we would learn a lot from this man who has seen so much in his life. And so he was also, it was not just our school or our institutions, but it was mainly these guys that taught us what is production, what is, how do you even balance. So musically, if you've got it right, then you'll automatically find things falling in place, even in terms of mixing and recording.
And then you
So-
had engineers like Mr. Daman Sood, who,
Yes.
it's just crazy, microphones that you would only see in audio porn magazines like Mix magazines were there available to you at Western Outdoor Studios. There are very few studios that had that at that time. And he was doing with all this gear and beautiful microphones and showing you what kind of difference a microphone would make from the other microphone. It's like the same instrument, all the kind of things. And those could only be possible at that time because of the big studios.
And you went to a
an
studio.
individual. Today,
Yeah.
honestly speaking, whatever is there at Yash Raj, I cannot afford it. There's no way. So, just, in a nutshell, just for me to say, record whatever you do, even if you're recording a solo instrument, record in a big studio, you will know the difference. Mix wherever you want to. I don't care. Okay? But
That
just
brings-
capture it in that kind of vibe, in that air. And that's what makes the difference.
That's another thing we didn't touch upon. I mean, we very briefly touched upon when Shantanu was saying the big studio. As you guys know, air is a big theme in the big studio. You need large rooms to record big sounds. You need large speakers to move air to hear those big sounds in a control room. Those large speakers need a large control room to play back in. Yeah, but there were a lot of other things when you stepped into a big studio. Firstly, there was always the console. I think most of us today are relegated to, at the most, recording 2 mics using an interface and 2 knobs with the built-in mic preamps on the interface. Yeah, but when you have a room that's filled with mics and you have a band that's tight and want to play together, because even the band knows, it doesn't matter how many tracks you have available in Pro Tools or whatever you are using, the band knows that they sound like a band when they play together. Okay? And the moment you try to record multiple mic inputs, yeah, you immediately realize the difference between playing with a DAW and playing with a real console. Because what are the advantages? Everything is immediately tactile. You want to make a change, you reach out your hand, grab a fader, pull it up, pull it down, do what you want. So you had to have a big console. And when I say a console, I mean an actual console. I don't mean an Avid S6.
A control surface.
A control surface. Yeah, I personally use a control surface because space constraints myself. And the last studio I worked for, I installed a control surface thrice, actually, over a console. But there's nothing like having a big console with multiple mic inputs to handle a big recording in a big studio. And I think the other thing I wanted to bring out was that the art of recording itself is dying out. It's dying out completely because, like I said earlier,
It's dead.
and the reason why I think it today takes us 400 tracks with options, 300 layers of kicks and kick drums and other such rubbish for a simple pop song, and we're still not able to create a hit out of it, is because there is no synergy in the song. Everything feels disconnected because people haven't played it together. It hasn't been recorded well, or it's recorded perfect in time. Everything is flawless. That's not a performance. That's a computer working. Real performances are not flawless like that. It's not real. And you need studios to keep this culture alive, the culture of recording, the art of recording. Today, I think the people who are busiest recording are the guys who are creating the samples that you all use. They're the only ones who are actually getting to do recording on a big scale and making money, yes. I think probably the largest number of sessions are being held by the guys who produce Vienna Symphonic and Spitfire audio, of strings and brass and whatever other orchestral parts. Now, I know it's very easy to say, oh, you guys should all go out and record an orchestra and record a live brass section, and probably thinking, who are these four old farts saying fuck this and fuck that, and you know. But that is the point. We feel very strongly about this. And as we pointed out earlier, it's not just the gear. It is the knowledge behind the gear, the knowledge and understanding of how it all works, how it all comes together, how it's all put together, that's being handed over, the baton is being passed, not immediately, slowly over the years from one person to another, till you are sure that the person you are entrusting this knowledge to has understood it and will pass it on to the next person down the line. I've always believed in this, in the largest sense. I'm proud to say that I can't think of a single person who has assisted me who is not a bigger, larger, richer engineer than me today. And I'm proud of all of them. And it's because I believe that you shouldn't hide the knowledge. And there seems to be, I mean, this is number one question I get asked, that what is your secret? I've been doing clinics all over the country showing API consoles and Genelec speakers just now. And I've been playing back stems from my mixes or entire mixes also. And everyone says, what is the secret? There's no big secret. In some of the songs, it was because I was lucky enough to work with people I vibed with. In some of the songs, I was lucky enough to get a fabulously recorded song. A fabulously recorded song pretty much mixes itself. You really don't have to do much to it. The secret to mixing a fabulously recording song is not seeing what you can do to it, but seeing what you shouldn't do to it, actually. And some of it I've just been hopefully lucky enough to do for myself. But there is no great secret. There is no big secret. At least I don't consider it any secret. At a recent demo, somebody was listening to it and just went on walking around behind the console and checking the wiring and looking behind the speakers to see, till I finally told him. And he said, what converters are you using? And I said, I'm using these custom-made Prism converters that, they were custom-made for me by Prism. And he said, that's why it sounds so good. And then I pulled down my laptop lid, behind which I had got two 8-channel Behringers, which were the DA converters I was actually using. So there is no secret sauce. It is just the culmination of...
There is. Just smoke it. It's there. There is secret. He
That's
doesn't
not
know.
sauce.
He doesn't know.
Shantanu, that's not sauce.
He doesn't know anything.
Okay, so there's no secret sauce. It's just the culmination of having the luck of having learned and had all this knowledge imbibed. Shantanu made a reference to the 40 holes with 80 hands. I wasn't there. I had never been to Yash Raj at that point, I think. But even I know the legend of that story. And at a workshop I was lucky enough to get my hands on that session for the workshop trial. But it was so legendary. I mean, I can still, even today, remember this photo on Facebook of the Yash Raj room with no people inside, just 40 large 3-foot dhols in precise order around that big room. So that's what he was saying when he says legend, law, passing of stories, passing of knowledge. It's not exclusive to each other. It's all part of the big picture. It's what shaped us, all of us who were lucky enough to have it, into getting where we are today.
Yeah.
KJ?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, you know, uh, we always, all of us when we were starting off our careers, none of us actually come from film backgrounds, you know. Okay, Vishwadeep is FTII, but that's the only film, yeah, it's not a film background, it's FTII. So all of us grew up so-called what is today known as independent music. To me, there's nothing like, we were just used to hearing a sound, and that sound that we all glued into and related to just happened to be sound that came out of the big studios. So, which is why we were automatically migrating towards the so-called big studio sound. Could you create that big studio sound in a small studio? No. I honestly don't think so. Especially when it comes to recording, but like Farhad and all of us, we kept saying, because you have to move that air. So, go in search of a sound and find out where it is that you're lacking. And you will usually come down to a point where you will say it's probably the artist, the microphone, and the room. All these three things. And that is actually what is going to... Today, everything does not have to be big. But everything has to be able to breathe. You know, you can't have a big rhythm section, a big bass section, a big string section. Everything is then eating into each other and it's a mess. Okay? Unless you're Tears for Fears and you do
We have a
something.
saying that if you make everyone fat, they won't all fit in the elevator.
That's true.
Or in a big studio. Okay, I'm going to take from Farhad and say, okay, last one quick sentence on what is the takeoff on today's meeting. Everyone.
Oh, there's
Quick
no,
one.
there's no doubt. You want big sound, you got to go to a big studio.
All right, Farhad.
I think we live in a time where it's a challenge, definitely. There is an expense involved, definitely. And I remember when we were well paid and the studios were used and the film used to make 2 crores. We're living in a day now where opening weekend, if it didn't make 300 crores, it's a flop film. That shows a sign that there is definitely money out there that can be utilized to do this. It would be barely a drop in the ocean in terms of production cost. So what we have to do is to demand excellence, always. Demand excellence in everything you do. Demand excellence, demand to be paid for that excellence, because excellence comes at a price. And that's the only way I think we can move forward. We need big studios.
Okay, cool. Vishwa?
What use is this huge church without a pastor? So if you're going to have a huge
Man, that
studio,
is some serious statement, man.
I know
You
of,
looked it up somewhere, huh, Abhi?
Man, everyone
wish-
clap for that. Please, please. That is amazing.
I wish. So what happens is I've seen this huge, massive studio in Hyderabad. Fantastic studio. It has everything, but it does not have a violin section. Unfortunately, today we have reached that spot. So they tried when that particular studio, when they opened it in a big way, they tried to get musicians from Chennai to come and record over here. Imagine what the cost was like. It just went through the roof, and it was a logistical nightmare, obviously. So even if we have like such huge places, such huge rooms, what are they without the musicians? What are they without performers? So if we are not going to get together and encourage ourselves, or your next generation, particularly I'm talking about, if you're not going to utilize that particular studio, it is going to be just real estate property. Having said that, I still like the to quote Ralph Waldo Emerson, an American author, that I like the church best without, when they've not started the service. the quietness of the church. So when he's saying he's walking into the studio and saying that, wow,
No, I don't say wow.
oh fuck. So when he says, oh fuck, that is
That's wow.
precisely the feeling that you are getting. But at the same time, that 2 minutes of peace gets broken by a tsunami of musicians. I'm still waiting, hopeful, that it will come. I don't know whether in our lifetime.
It will come.
But
And we will bring it to you.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you, Bishwadeep Rodriguez. He's just shifted over. My my quick 2 bits before I think she's standing on the side to throw us off the stage. But don't worry, we won't move. Quick bit is for learning from this is that please go back and listen to the classics. I'm just going back to the root. We grew up in the music, we grew up listening to music which was made in large studios, which is bands and other stuff. So we wanted to emulate that, and for us, that is what we were striving for in our heads. So that prompted us to push that. Now the new generation is making music which is diametrically 180 degrees opposite of that. It is very individualistic. It's very centered around one person who's doing everything. So obviously the need for that large studio is not there. So if you are growing up on that music, you will not feel the need inside you to go to a large studio. So I would say go back and maybe listen to the music which had bands, and maybe that will inspire you in your head to try and kind of achieve that sound. And maybe that will propel you to want to try out. And once you try out, you're going to get sucked in. And once you have tasted something good, like wine, weed, whatever, if you've tasted something good, there's no going back. And recording in a large studio is essentially a part of that. There's no going back. So Shantanu, thanks to him, and Empire Studio and all the big studios I worked with, they've really messed with me. So I am constantly in my small room trying to emulate that forever in my life. So guys, go back and just listen. Thank you very much for being here. And thank you, Palm Show, and Anil, for organizing this once again after 2 years of everybody staying at home. And good to meet up with all of you here.
3 years.
3 years? Oh shit, 3 years. Ooh.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are open for question and answers. If anyone would like to ask any questions, we can pass the mic.
Maybe कुछ समझ में नहीं आया. Kushro. Yes,
hi.
had
Hi,
to be,
KJ.
had to be you.
Yeah, has to be
tell
me. 15 years ago, we had this conversation, KJ,
Yeah.
in Lakosi.
Yeah,
when
I know.
studios are becoming smaller and smaller, and I said, KJ, you need to wait for 15 years when this is going to turn around. 2022, KJ, it's turning around. I'm glad about that. But I don't have any questions, but a perspective of what happened is what I would like to give everybody over here. Number one, as the young engineers over here, KJ and everybody else is right, you need to hear the old bands, but also you need to go and listen to large live orchestra. NCPA exists in Mumbai. Please go.
Very right.
Go and hear the orchestra. Get a feel of the space when the large space plays. Number
Absolutely.
two, what happened and why the studios became smaller, because I've been studying this for like 30 odd years, is we stopped using large monitors. We started compromising with small monitors. Those big Altec Lansings, those big RCA monitors, we just made those monitors small, monitors became small, control rooms became small, and then the studio became small. We compromised the bandwidth and the frequency response of what we heard. We started becoming people who listen to radios and transistors. Unfortunately, our producers also started listening. Production is very different from mixing, as they said, because we lost the role of the producer. The producer used to say to the musician, you're not going to do this. Hugh Padgham told that to Phil Collins, you're not going to do this. And that's how Phil Collins wins Grammy Awards, because there was Hugh Padgham. We lost the producer. You know, we put them out. That was the biggest problem that we did. We put the producer out, we relegated him to the side. And the people who pay the money for these albums, they don't own good systems in their houses. How is he ever going to realize what you are making? He's never going to realize it. Because we are...
But he can't afford it. He can't afford it. What happens when he can't afford it?
No, see, this simple
Now you
thing.
can.
A studio didn't have one thing which the Western studios had. They had listening rooms. Besides the mix room, they had a listening room, which was just for the person to listen to what they have made. Without the console, without the gear, it was a playback system.
Okay, Kushro, hold that thought for a second. He just reminded me of something, so before I forget it, because I'm at that age, I forget very quickly. So thank you, Kushro, for reminding me. This is something which engineer H. Sridhar once told me while I was working with him in Chennai, and he said, it's the duty of every sound engineer, it's the duty, he said that word very clearly, I remember, it's the duty of every sound engineer to invest, save money, and invest in a good listening playback system for himself. All right, Khushro, thank you for reminding me that.
To quote Shantanu, abso-fucking-lutely.
You owe it to yourselves. That's where we compromise. I'm spending 5 lakh or 2 lakhs or 1 lakh, whatever, on an outboard gear, and I don't even have a good enough listening. I'm not talking about the studio. A listening system in my house to listen to the music which I'm mixing or somebody else is mixing. How am I going to compare it? How am I going to reference myself? I have no idea. So obviously, if your reference is skewered, you will make out something which is skewered. So thank you, Kushro, for reminding me.
Yeah, and lastly, I would like to say the most important point, okay? It is nothing to do with studios. There is no political will. And I mean a political will, by which I mean there are only 2 types of genuinely structured classical music forms in the world. Western classical and Indian classical. Everything else is folk music. The Red Indians have folk music, Thailand has folk music. A structured classical form only exists in two nations, two civilizations, Indian classical and Western classical. We have failed the Indian classical music scene by making world-class recordings about them. And that is why our musicians died. I'll give you an example. We are a country of 1.3 billion people. NCPA, National Center of Performing Arts, has an income tax inquiry on them. Tata's supports them with a 15 crore rupee donation after 13 crores from Ford Foundation. And the Income Tax Authority of India have put a case on them that you're making a profit. The only concert hall in India is being scrutinized by income tax, which is getting money from outside. Can you believe it? That is our mindset. And when I spoke to the chairman of NCPA, he told me something. You know, the shameful thing is, in a country of 1.3 billion people, this is the situation. In a country of 60 million people, that is Germany, very rich country, just the budget for the arts in Germany, in a country of 60 million people, is $2.3 billion. Euros, sorry, that is about $2.7 billion. That is what the government is giving for the arts. And we as such a big Bollywood, Tollywood, Collywood, whatever wood you want to call it, don't have the wood to go and tell the minister, bro, you need to spend money for the arts. We don't have that spine. It doesn't exist. It's a fact of life.
This is always,
I hate to admit,
this has
but
always
you're
been a
absolutely
war
right.
band. This has always been an issue. Now, even more with mass privatization. So, whichever way, this takes this whole conversation and this whole discussion to another format. But some amount of government help and aid is very much necessary. But that would mean having the right people in the right ministry. And this has been a fight all along. The film industry they've been taxing the film industry where it's not even formally an industry. So, but you're going to tax it. So there are no logical this thing. So I'm not going to stand here and try and, get into that zone. But it comes down to who's going to bell the cat. And as you said, it requires visionaries to sit and actually take an active step to collectively work on all kinds of arts, performing arts, sculpture, painting, whatever. It does require a very proactive government participation. But that can only come when all of us are thinking on those lines. So it goes back a long way, but yes, it is possible. And going back to listening to it in the bigger monitors, in our very humble days, it's still very humble. When we were recording in smaller studios, the exercise was always to go and listen to it in a bigger studio, like Sunny or like in any other. I'm not saying they were ideal studios, but at least they had the range and there was space and you could tweak up the volume to listen to it in a place, okay, what is lacking in terms of range. So it may not have been the ideal listening condition, it may not have been the thing, but it gave me scale, it gave me that where I lacked. I could be a little more generous with the bass, I could be a little more generous with the EQs. So these kind of things was something that we used to run to the bigger studios to try and figure out.
Any other questions? No one? Oh, okay. Yes, please.
Can you have the mic at the front, please?
My question is very, it might be logical or something like that.
Please.
But as we are speaking about bigger studios and all those, I listen to the Air Rahman music watch. So what he does is, what I see from the videos I see on the YouTube is that he has a lot of electronic music in his. So the question is very simple. Why his songs sound so soulful? Even though it has a lot of electronic, and what the Sir Biswas sir was talking, that we should have a lot of music or live, what do you say, while you're saying violin chahiye.
Well, can I answer him for that?
Yeah.
One, pushing for the return of one art form does not preclude us excluding the other art form. I think KJ did briefly mention that if you are into electronic music or what is largely electronic instrument based pop music, there's no requirement for you to come to a large studio. Right? And by the way, I think the three largest studios that exist in India today are owned by Mr. Rahman. So, don't believe everything you see in the video. What you see in the video is what is chosen to be shared with you.
Mr. Rahman has been, I think, instrumental in breaking that myth that you have to have 40 dholaks and 50 violinists in the whole process. Having said that, today when he's recording a string section, a brass section, he is doing it. Unfortunately, he has to go to another country to do it. Even Mr. Rahman has to go to another country to do it. Because...
And this is despite having two large studios of his own in which he could do it.
Yes.
And
so again, it's a question of the church without the priest.
Okay, I think just to kind of quickly put that into perspective, I have another engineer here, PA Deepak, who can corroborate me on that if I'm wrong, is that the reason he started the KM Conservatory was for the same reason. Because he felt there were not enough kids learning Western classical instrumentation in India. And for that reason, he's one of the few guys, composers in India, who actually is giving weightage to education in music. So he is actually building an entire youngsters who are going to be playing Western musical instruments. They don't teach harmonium there, they don't teach Indian instruments. Not to say that it's not important, but he knows that there are a lot of other institutes which are teaching that and not this. So he's doing that, one. Secondly, what you're talking about, in my understanding, is now you are actually talking about musical, you're asking an opinion on the music, what kind of music he's making. That's got nothing to do with this part of technology as such. You can create the most soulful of music with just one guitar or just a voice, or even with an orchestra, or even a hip-hop beat. It doesn't matter. That's a different thing we are talking about. Musicality is a different issue. Here we are talking about how we can use the large format studios versus the home studio in terms of whatever music we are making. So there's a little difference in what I think your question was.
I'd like to also add a little thing. I don't know how many of you guys are aware of a thing called the song violin. In the old days, what used to happen is we used to record a song with everything live, and before the singer came in to sing it, somebody would come and actually play the entire song, the tune on a violin. This guy would come in, look at the sheet music written down of the melody, put the violin up, let me adjust the mic, and say, take. One take. Entire song perfectly. He'd get paid 750 rupees and he would go away. He was allowed to only do 2 sessions a day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon by union rules. And I used to always say that this man has worked 30 years of training on that instrument to be able to walk into a studio, read a piece of music, do it, dub it perfectly in one take, and go away with 750 rupees, making only 1500 rupees a day because that's all the union allows him to. That's what he gets for 30 years of learning. And I told myself then, when I was speaking to the guy, that there will be a time when you need someone like him and they will just not be available, and somebody will pay 30,000 rupees for someone like this to come in and just play it in one take. Okay? And the same thing may happen to large format studios today. If we don't stop the madness, we've already lost the musicians. And today I'm glad it's karma, it's perfect revenge that the same guys who used to slog for 700 and 1500 rupees a day, whose jobs were taken away by some young kid with a sampler who's then making 10 grand a day for playing with it, those same guys are now being called in and they say, oh, I'll come to do the part for 35,000 rupees. And that's fair enough. I don't think that's enough money.
Yeah.
Right? Thank you, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, we end this session now. I would like to call upon Anil Chopra, the founder and director of Palm Expo, to felicitate our panelists. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay back for the AV Architect Award of the Year, which is being conferred to Mr. Narendra Naidu. I request everyone to stay back and move a little ahead. Thank you.